you ever suspected that this world is not what it seems?
Have you ever experienced something you couldn't explain?
Something strange?
Something extraordinary?
If not, do you wish you had?
Do you long to experience that which lies beyond the bounds of the mundane world?
Hidden somewhere just beyond the limits of our senses.
If so, then join us as we take you on a journey
that blurs the lines between the normal and the paranormal. Welcome to Paranormalcy.
There is something undoubtedly strange and unidentified happening in our skies. However, the question remains just who, or rather what, is piloting these strange craft? Are they human pilots as part of some deep black budget project? Perhaps visitors from another star system? Maybe even another dimension? Are they being piloted at all? Or are they some kind of drone, or even stranger still, life forms in and of themselves? Over the years, mainstream science has weighed in on the search for extraterrestrial life in various ways. But how much progress has been made in this endeavor? Who has been searching? And more importantly, are those who have been searching doing so in earnest, or simply adding yet another layer in the elaborate smokescreen meant to obfuscate the truth and frustrate those in pursuit of it?
Frank Drake isn't a household name, but he was no less a titan in the world of astrophysics. He worked on Project Ozma with SETI, using radio waves to search for signs of life orbiting distant stars, and he helped develop the Arecibo message, the Voyager record, and worked with Carl Sagan to develop the Pioneer plaque. He worked at the National Radio Astronomy Observatory, the SETI Institute, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, Cornell, UC Santa Cruz, and graduated from both Harvard and Cornell. He was the president of the board at the SETI Institute at its foundation. He also wrote the Drake equation, which you probably have heard of. This is some really complex math, so for those of you watching the video, I'm going to put up some visual aids. This is the Drake equation. What this is saying is that the number of currently active and communicative civilizations in our galaxy is equal to the average rate of star formation in our galaxy, times the fraction of those stars that have planets, times the average number of planets that can support life per star, times the fraction of planets that could support life and actually do, times the fraction of planets with life that go on to actually develop civilization, times the fraction of civilization that develop the capacity for communication, times the length of time for which they are actually active. This, of course, poses problems. It naturally contains the anthropic bias, because the only possible sample is the one that we are living. It assumes that all life will develop to be like us, that we all have the same needs and the same habitable zones around similar stars. The single example of life that we do have, our own, does not do much to broadcast in a way that others would be able to see, and the longevity of civilizations is subject to conjecture, which would drastically change the value of L. The numbers vary drastically, but they're never zero. In his original equation, Drake assumed 10 new stars per year, times 50% of stars with planets, times 2 habitable planets per solar system, times 100% chance that a habitable planet develops life, times 1% the chance that life develops intelligence, times 1% the chance that life can communicate across space, and times 10,000 years, the length of time that they would send signals into space. This resulted in 10 civilizations in the Milky Way alone, and 1,500 billion civilizations in the universe. But I don't think some of those numbers are right, so I reran the equation with more modern numbers, but extremely conservative estimates. I assumed 7 new stars per year, 75% of stars with planets, 0.20 the number of habitable planets per solar system, times 0.01% chance of a habitable planet developing life, times 0.01% chance that life develops intelligence, times 0.01% chance that life can communicate across space, and times 100 years, the length of the time that they would send signals into space. Statistically, there are 0 civilizations in the galaxy, which we know is untrue, but there are still 16 in the universe. Life is an inevitability. and so is communication when the signals that you're sending out into space are typically easily detectable. We've been searching for them for decades. Dyson spheres would cause an increase in infrared radiation. The light from an incomenopolis or planet-wide city would be plainly visible, and the displacement of a star due to a stellar engine would be obvious over time. Nitrogen dioxide and chlorofluorocarbons are industrial pollutants, and we already have the technology to search for those gases in the atmospheres of distant planets. Radiation in its many forms is detectable from many light years away. So, if all of that's true, and there are likely many communicative civilizations in the Milky Way, where is everyone? Well, now we've arrived at the Fermi paradox, which, if you're unfamiliar, posits the following contradiction. If there are billions of stars in the galaxy which are similar to the Sun, which there are, and if many of these stars have Earth-like planets in a habitable zone, which they do, and if many of those stars, and presumably their planets, are the same age or older than the Sun, which we can reasonably assume that they are, then we can assume that many of them have developed some form of intelligent life. Much fewer of those intelligent life forms would have developed civilization, and fewer still would have developed interstellar communication or travel in some form. Setting aside the fact that we should be able to detect some form of communication, even at our current conception of the speed of interstellar travel, which is about 10% of the speed of light, we could still traverse the galaxy in a little over 1 million years. If we were capable of traveling at light speed, it would take a little over 100,000. That's nothing. Even the million-year estimate is just 0.75% of the age of the Milky Way. 100,000 is 0.0007% of the age of just our galaxy alone. These are absurdly small points on the timescale of the galaxy, so if all of this time has elapsed, and there are many stars older than the Sun, with many planets older than the Earth, we should have been visited by extraterrestrials at some point. If not our planet, then certainly our solar system by now. Yet, allegedly, we have not. This problem was first brought up by Konstantin Tsiolkovsky in the 1930s, and to explain it, he came up with what was called zoo theory, the theory that extraterrestrials avoid communication with Earth to allow us to develop naturally. Other theories include laboratory theory, which posits that the Earth is being intentionally observed for some scientific purpose, civilization-level intelligence being very rare, extinction by natural causes or by the actions of the intelligent civilization itself, that we are simply the most advanced, that some civilization is out there nuking other intelligent races, or that alien physiology is so drastically different that it would render communication impossible. It may make more sense for them to live on starships than on planets, or they may not be interested in traversing the galaxy. It may be unnecessarily taxing for them to physically explore. Then there's the possibility that everyone may be doing what we do, listening but not transmitting. The search for extraterrestrial life doesn't even have an explicit policy if they do hear something. They simply say that they will make international consultations before the decision is made. And this is where things start to get frustrating, because while the policy may be to do that, the practice doesn't appear to be. In 2021, the Vanishing and Appearing Sources During a Century of Observation project published a list of 9 stars which seem to have appeared and vanished in the sky on April 12, 1950. This was based on data from the U.S. Naval Observatory, which could not have been contaminated by satellites or other space junk because there were no satellites or other space junk in the early 1950s. But the reason that we won't consider the possibility that this might be an extraterrestrial craft or a light signature is that the plates were more likely contaminated by fallout from an unlisted atomic bomb test, or we observed a novel celestial phenomenon 9 times in one night and haven't observed it ever again in the interceding 74 years. Fast and ultra-fast radio bursts, as well as gamma-ray bursts, have been detected since the early 2000s and the 1960s respectively. A lot of these bursts are one-offs and are attributed ambiguously to catastrophic stellar events, but some repeat. This repetition can be completely random or the exact opposite, neither of which we can fully explain. The reason that we won't consider the possibility that this may be the byproduct of extraterrestrial intelligence is because, based on one correlation between a gamma-ray burst and a gravity wave, we know for a fact that they are the product of supernovae, superluminous supernovae, or kilonovae. We have never even directly observed a kilonova. The dimming of Tabby's star has been observed for over 100 years. It dipped by 15% luminosity in March of 2011, 22% in February of 2013, and an additional 8% in April of 2013. Now, again, we have over 100 years of data on this particular star and have never observed these enormous objects transiting them. And they truly would be titanic in size. A transit of a planet the size of Jupiter would only cause a 1% dimming. The largest planet that we've ever discovered is only 1.6 times Jupiter's radius, but 3 objects, 15 and 22 and 8 times the size of Jupiter, appeared and disappeared in this star system alone, never to be seen again. Over a 4-month period in 2019, the star dimmed 11%, and over the first 100 years of data, we've observed that the star has faded by about 20% overall, which we just can't explain. The reason that we won't consider the possibility that this may be something like a Dyson sphere was then explained in the Astrophysical Journal. It never happened. Tabby's star wasn't dimming, 100 years of data was wrong. 6 months after it never happened, the Astrophysical Journal published another article saying that it did happen. The star was dimming by 0.34% per year, and in comparison with over 350 other stars, Tabby's star's dimming is unique. Then, the reason that we wouldn't consider the possibility that it may be extraterrestrial became a ring of dust, a cloud of disintegrating comets, a protoplanetary disk, a planetary debris field, the stars swallowing a planet, a large planet with oscillating rings followed by swarms of asteroids, or moons being stripped from their planets and forming orbits that produce similar light curves, all previously unobserved and with no evidence such as gravitational waves or infrared signatures to suggest that those things were the case over the course of 100 years of observation. In 2017, Oumuamua, an abnormally shaped object whose origin we did not know but appeared to be interstellar, passed through our solar system, and we were quick to dismiss it as potentially extraterrestrial. As it entered our solar system, we observed that Oumuamua was unusually shiny and elongated, and as it passed within 24 million miles of the Sun, which is closer than the orbit of Mercury, it exhibited non-gravitational acceleration, which would make sense for a comet, except that no coma was ever observed, and it was actually reclassified by the International Astronomical Union from Comet 2017 U1 to Asteroid 2017 U1 for that exact reason. Abraham Loeb, the chair of the astronomy department at Harvard, wrote for Scientific American, quote, "Comets exhibit such a behavior when ices on their surface heat up from solar illumination and evaporate, generating thrust through the rocket effect. The extra push for Oumuamua could have originated by cometary outgassing if at least 1/10 of its mass evaporated. But such a massive evaporation would have naturally led to the appearance of a cometary tail, and none was ever seen. Moreover, cometary outgassing would have changed the rotation period of Oumuamua, and no such change was ever observed." To this day, the very first Google result for "Was Oumuamua alien?" says, highlighted, "Interstellar visitor Oumuamua isn't an alien spacecraft, it's just passing gas. We'll probably never know for sure, but this new explanation holds water," scientists say. Additional results include "Scientists solve alien spacecraft Oumuamua comet mystery," and "Giant comet-like object is not an alien ship." They include Abraham Loeb's argument, but not in a particularly fair light. Loeb has used the lack of data to propose Oumuamua as an alien spaceship, says one. "Loeb is being scientifically and journalistically irresponsible," says a comment on another. And the reason that we won't consider the possibility that this might be something like an extraterrestrial probe, said NASA, was that it actually was a comet. The outgassing was simply invisible. Silly us. In August of 1977, Ohio State University's Big Ear Radio Telescope was tasked with measuring variations in the intensity of radio signals against the cosmic background noise of the universe. And the way that this process worked was that a computer would receive data inputs and then output a printed page with different values that represented an average of intensity over a 10-second period. A space represented an intensity of 0 to 1, which was pretty normal. The numbers 1 through 9 represented the correspondingly numbered intensities, and then it began at A with an intensity of 10 and moved through the alphabet. So for those of you watching, here's an image of the printout for the 15th of August 1977. And we see that spaces are the standard, and then we have a lot of 1s, fewer 2s, some 3s and 4s, and even a 6 or a 7. But circled in red, you will see the wow message, a 72-second radio burst. In the first 10 seconds, it was 6 orders of magnitude higher than the cosmic background noise. In the second 10 seconds, seconds, it was 14 orders higher, then 26, and finally reached 30 orders of magnitude higher than the cosmic background before tapering off into a 19 and then a 5. Not only is this anomalously impressive, but it also came in at 1420 megahertz, the electromagnetic signature given off by hydrogen, the most abundant element in the universe. This is what we believe that extraterrestrials will be broadcasting in if they're trying to find other intelligent species, and it's actually a protected range that is illegal to broadcast in because it's so important to radio astronomy. The signal may even have continued longer than 72 seconds, but due to structural limitations of the big ear, this is the longest that we were able to observe it, and we were unable to determine where exactly it came from. That didn't stop us from searching, though. The scientists that originally received the message searched for recurrences for a few months. It was again searched for in 1987, 89, 95, 96, and 99, aiming at the broad area of the sky that the big ear was pointed at, but we received nothing. Finally, in the 2010s and 2020s, we were able to narrow down exactly what part of the sky the WOW signal came from, identify the possible stars that were Earth-like and likely had planets that could support life, and conduct a targeted search for the source of the signal. The search lasted a grand total of 1 hour and 44 minutes, and found no technosignature candidates. Numerous explanations have been given for this, including a rotating source, a signal sweeping in frequency, or a radio burst, and it's even been posited that it was a frequency illegally beamed from Earth which was reflected back into the big ear by a piece of space debris. We really don't know. But one thing we do know, according to METI President Douglas Vakach, is that it's not extraterrestrials. Based on a couple months of looking around in a general area, and then 5 attempts to look at the same general area over the course of 12 years, nearly 2 decades after the signal was received, and 1 hour and 44 minutes of specific looking, he believes that the signal has very little credibility. The Arecibo message was an interstellar radio message that was sent in the direction of the Messier 13 globular cluster in 1974. It was designed by Frank Drake, Carl Sagan, and a group of Cornell University and Arecibo scientists, and it contained the numbers 1 through 10, the atomic numbers of hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and phosphorus, which make up our DNA, the formulas of the chemical compounds that make up the nucleotides in our DNA, the estimated number of those nucleotides in the human genome, the structure of our DNA, the height of an average man and a representation of him, the population of the Earth, a graphic of the solar system indicating where we live, and a representation of the radio telescope that sent the message. Nearly 30 years later, we received a reply. One that was disregarded with swiftness by SETI because it was in the form of a crop circle and not a radio message. I'm willing to concede that it actually is very improbable, not impossible, which I specify because they use those terms interchangeably, that the message was intercepted. However, the rest of the refutation that they published is hardly a refutation at all. It is instead an especially petulant and whiny example of the appeal to ridicule fallacy, where in the absence of an actual refutation, one attempts to dismiss with mockery, humor, and sarcasm. They go so far as to ask why the aliens didn't leave them a book, a CD, or another communication in, quote, whatever form is convenient, unquote, except for crop circles, apparently, before griping, how come they look like us, and claiming anthropocentric conceit as the explanation, criticizing the biochemistry, and concluding with a truly stunning tirade about how baloney crop circles are, to explain why the answer needed no further consideration. It's all a joke, they explained. Crop circles are proven to be an absolute hoax. It's completely unworthy of serious consideration. Well, it just so happens that crop circles were the next on my list, so I'll segue into that without any further discussion on why the search for extraterrestrial intelligence doesn't take crop circle research more seriously. The modern crop circle phenomenon began in Patrick Moore's field in 1973 in Wiltshire, England. It continued throughout the 70s and 80s, getting more and more complex, and was widely dismissed as a hoax after, in 1991, Doug Bauer and Dave Chorley revealed that they had made every single crop circle formation since 1973 using boards and ropes. Fortunately, William Levingood, a biochemist, didn't take this at face value, and he began studying the phenomenon. Over a decade-long study, he was able to show that the stalks of the grains within crop circles were exposed to high levels of electromagnetic and microwave radiation, causing them to become more supple than they normally would be. This elongated their nodes and allowed them to be bent without breaking or killing the plant. In some circles, the plants didn't even show scrape marks. This includes canola plants, which are notoriously fragile both in stalk and in flower, and there have been crop crop circles where not only were the canola stalks bent but intact, but not a flower was disturbed in the making. In their joint investigation into over 250 crop circles, the BLT Group and Dartmouth College, working with researchers in the US, Canada, and Europe, found that the crop notes were shown to increase in size by up to 172%, and the seeds were shown to atrophy. If the seeds did germinate, they weren't shown to germinate the same way, and tiny magnetic spheres 10 to 40 microns in diameter were found both in the plants and the soil. They even saw that the phantom image of these circles would show up in newly planted crops for several years after the fact. They concluded that these circles were made with a technology that is beyond our reach. The technology doesn't even exist now, but let's say for argument that the military had it in the 1970s. How did Bower and Chorley obtain it, and why would they use it to hoax people, and then why would they admit it but not the entire story? Why show us the boards and ropes trick but omit that? Jamie Maussan, a Mexican journalist, has been offering $100,000 for quite some time to anyone that can prove that they can make a complex formation in the middle of the night with no lights and leaving no trace. It doesn't even have to be perfect. All they have to do is make an effort and document it. Why didn't Bower or Chorley or anyone else come forward to claim the cash? Why go to the same fields over and over again in populated areas where people would anticipate and start showing up, some with night vision goggles and sound pickups, to get a video of them being made? People even do flyovers in airplanes, yet only one video exists which allegedly shows one being made. The video was taken in 1996 by John Whaley, who recorded about 15 minutes of orbs flying around above a field and a crop circle appearing. Whaley was the sole witness of the event itself, as he was sleeping in a tent in the field in which it happened, but he took the video at dawn and began showing people around 10:30 in the morning on the day that the formation appeared. And this video shows the circle in the process of being made with no change in the quality of light from the dawning sun. So if he were to fake this, he would have had to make and hand film a formation with perfect geometry in the light of the dawning sun, drive somewhere where he had access to video editing technology, edit the video, make an entirely new video cassette, and drive back in the span of about 5.5 hours. I'm not a video expert, but I can say with some certainty that given the technology at the time, the digital editing that would have had to be done on each frame of that video would have been extremely time-consuming and expensive. The practical effects may have been cheaper if it was just lights, but the video shows the crop circle in the process of being made in the background with no change in the quality of light at all. It would have involved clever editing, possibly the cutting and splicing of film, as well as real-time practical effects for the orbs of light, and he would have had to have several more people there to help make the crop circle itself so that he could film it. Just hours after he filmed it, a man named Peter Sorensen, who was apparently a regular at this particular field, convinced John to hand over the recording and subsequently had it stolen, and all he was able to save was about 15 seconds of it. This 15 seconds has been analyzed, and there was no evidence of either practical or animated effects. 8 years after the fact, someone went to the Disney animation team to ask them how long it would take them to edit the video, and they quoted 4 days, and said they weren't even sure if it would look as good and the animation would be easily detectable. It doesn't make any sense. But in the face of this evidence, the top Google results for "Are crop circles real?" include "Crop circles were made by supernatural forces named Doug and Dave," "Crop circles, the art of the hoax," "Psst, crop circles were a hoax," and "Crop circle, mystery, phenomenon, hoax." "Crop circles really are no mystery," one of them says. "The expansive forms of landscape art are made by people." SETI themselves said it best, quote, "There is a lack of convincing physical evidence that anyone has made them. We are also informed by Chilbolton that the recent glyphs appeared, as so many do, after a weekend. Bottom line, crop circles are decorative, impressive, and provocative, but not informative. We can expect better from true extraterrestrial intelligence," unquote. Never mind the fact that there are eyewitnesses and video evidence. Never mind the research published in peer-reviewed scientific journals. In the face of all of this evidence, it seems a little bit like anthropocentric conceit to assume that nothing is going on and we're the only ones here, but I'm just a conspiracy theorist. I think if we look, we'll find that these beings have been here, or at the very least contacting us from elsewhere, for quite a long time. And we can find stories about them not in the pages of some tabloid, but in the memoirs of J. Allen Hynek, who investigated them for the US Air Force. He writes about cases that were of particular interest to him, and I'll read some of them now. On October 23, 1965, a radio announcer of good reputation was driving towards Long Prairie, a community west of Minneapolis. When he was just 4 miles from town, in rolling hill country, he rounded a curve and there, just before him in the road, was a rocket-shaped object, silver in color. What appeared to the radio announcer next will be recognized by the experienced reader as a common feature. His car engine stopped and his car lights went off. He remained in his car, transfixed by the object, which was standing on fins and was 30 to 40 feet tall, about 10 feet thick, and had light shining from its bottom. This young man's own narrative account states, "I was driving west on Minnesota Highway 27 when I went around a bend in the road and my car engine stopped running and my lights went off. I looked up and saw this object standing in the middle of the road. It was around 7:15 p.m. I had just checked my watch a minute before, so I know what time it was. I finally coasted to a stop about 20 feet from it. I tried to start my car, and it would not start. I did not get any response to my starter. I then got out of my car with the idea to go up to it and try to rock the center of gravity and topple it over, so I would have the evidence right there in black and white. I got to the front end of my car and stopped with no further interest in going further, because 3 little creatures came from around behind and stood in front of the object. I think that they were looking at me. I cannot be sure because I did not see eyes of any sort. I know that I was looking at them and I was quite fascinated with what I saw. You might ask why, since I was willing to go up to them before, I did not go up to them now. I used what I hope was common sense. I felt that if they could stop my car, they would surely do something worse to me, and I wanted to live to tell the story so that the people of the United States would know that there were things of this nature. I can safely say that we looked at each other for about 3 minutes. Then they turned and went under the object, and a few seconds later, the object started to rise into the sky. After it was about 1/4 mile high, this is only a guess, the light went out and my car engine started to run again. I did not have to touch the starter, and my headlights came on. I looked at the area that it had been sitting on and could see no evidence that it had been on the ground. I then drove to the Todd County Sheriff's Office and reported what I had seen to the sheriff. He went back out to the spot and could find nothing on the road that would show that they were on the ground. That is what happened. I know that this is quite a wild story, but if you do not believe me, well, that's your tough luck. On the night of September 5th, 1964, near Cisco Grove, California, Mr. S., a young man out on a hunting trip, became separated from his 2 companions and, as dusk was approaching, decided to take shelter in a tree. He strapped himself to a branch with his belt to keep from falling off in his sleep. While seeking shelter, Mr. S. witnessed 3 flying objects, each equipped with a protruding and rotating light that emitted cooing noises. Upon first noticing the lights, he figured them to be helicopters out looking for him. Mr. S. left his tree nest and lighted signal fires on the ridge overlooking Granite Creek Valley. The lights then appeared to be 3 silvery objects that were circling his position. 2 unknown objects were dropped by them in their descent. Within a few minutes, he heard a loud crashing in the underbrush below, and frightened, he took sanctuary in the lower branches of a tall pine tree. He thereupon witnessed 2 human-like individuals approaching his signal fires. They were garbed in silvery, collarless suits, had unusual protruding eyes, and communicated to one another via an unintelligible cooing noise. According to Mr. S., they were trying to dislodge him from his tree position when a third alien, described by Mr. S. as a robot, appeared on the scene. Mr. S. fired some arrows at the robot but failed to distract or divert any of the strange individuals. He then tried lighting parts of his clothing on fire and throwing it at them to frighten them away. The individuals had violent reactions, and at that time their craft began to ascend upwards, emitting a vapor which caused him to black out. The only thing that prevented his falling was his bow wedged into the crotch of a living tree. Regaining consciousness in the early dawn, Mr. S. discovered that the UFO and its occupants had disappeared. He rejoined his hunting companions and told them his incredible tale. They remarked that it probably had something to do with the meteorite that the government was looking for. Later on, he relayed his story to his father-in-law, who persuaded him to get in touch with the authorities. Mr. S. contacted a local astronomy instructor, who subsequently notified Mather AFB officials. According to Air Force reports, Mr. S. was employed at a local missile production plant. He appeared stable and consistent in telling his story and believed that the incident occurred exactly as described. The actual tape recordings of his narration of the encounter were retained by the Air Force, as well as the arrows that he fired at the aliens. Blue Book labeled this one psychological, but to the best of J. Allen Hynek's knowledge, never studied the tapes. Yet even these stories aren't free of absurd explanations. Hynek describes the Kelly Hopkinsville encounters, which took place on August 21, 1955, where 5 adults and 7 children claimed that small alien creatures had attacked their farmhouse and the group had held them off with gunfire for nearly 4 hours. The family described that the beings were 2.5 to 3.5 feet tall, with a bald, oblong head that was egg-shaped, and when they opened fire, it sounded like the bullets were hitting a bucket. They made no sound, and when shot, would float over, or fall over, and then scurry for cover, but repeatedly approached the farmhouse with arms raised as though they were in a holdup. They moved slowly, on 2 feet, and made no attempt to enter the house, but instead stood outside and stared until they were frightened away. This apparently warranted the response of 4 city police officers, 5 state troopers, 3 deputy sheriffs, and 4 military police officers. No motive for a hoax was ever discovered, and Hynek states the simple folk were not seeking publicity and indeed suffered horribly from curiosity seekers, reporters, and sensation mongers. It is also highly unlikely that a hoax would involve many persons and a midnight dash to a police station miles away. This story would later be explained as the family being besieged and driven from their home by great horned owls. In September of 1961, Barney and Betty Hill were driving on Route 3 just south of Lancaster, New Hampshire when they saw a UFO. Betty was convinced, but Barney thought that it was just a commercial airliner or maybe a satellite. This craft, which was described as approximately 60 feet long, tailed their car, eventually overtaking them and causing them to stop in the middle of the highway. Barney, armed with a pistol, saw the crew, who were wearing shiny black or blue uniforms and caps but had grayish skin and bluish lips. The Hills' drive home then resumed. This drive, which should have taken 4 hours, took a total of 7, something that they could not account for, and they had no recollection of the approximately 35 miles that they were tailed by the UFO. Under hypnosis, they recounted a story in which they were captured by aliens, and Betty even spoke with the beings, who showed her a star map. Betty was able to draw this star map, despite the fact that we didn't have the technology to make it ourselves in 1961, and the map was later deciphered using a star catalog by Marjorie Fish, who determined that the beings must have been from Zeta Reticuli. This was published in Astronomy magazine, which invited comment and debate from the public, and even Carl Sagan weighed in on it. Later, several people would weigh in to talk about why the map was actually not accurate at all. I reviewed some of these articles, and some of the reasons include that several of the stars in the map, not including Zeta Reticuli, would not be able to support developing life, that hypnosis was fake. One article even went so far as to refer to it as a role-playing game between doctor and patient. Betty's story changed over the course of decades, and that Betty's map was not drawn with millimeter accuracy every single time she drew it. Again, in this situation, maybe Barney and Betty were liars that wanted to get famous. There's no evidence that this is the case. They didn't even want to tell anybody but their doctor. But let's say for argument that they were proven liars who had hoaxed multiple times before. Why debunk the map itself simply because the stars could not support developing life when that was never a claim that was made? Why refer to hypnosis as a role-playing game when any legitimate scientist knows that it was used in psychotherapy and cognitive behavioral therapy for well over 100 years? It was studied by Pierre Janet of the Collège de France and Sigmund Freud. The first major lab studies were published 91 years ago, and only after 10 years of in-depth research on the part of the author. The CIA is documented as having studied it in the 1950s, as well as experimenting with introducing anterograde and retrograde amnesia centered around the hypnotic event. Legitimate, accredited universities and the government are not going to waste their money in role-playing games. Why use the changing story as proof that this is a hoax when memories change over time, especially decades? The only thing that I can find that she lied about is that the aliens had bulbous noses, hardly an important detail nor one that someone might focus on in the greater context of trauma. If her unreliable memory is the problem, memory disturbances are a part of the diagnostic criteria for PTSD, along with recurrent, involuntary, and intrusive, distressing memories and dreams of the traumatic event, and psychological distress at the exposure to those triggers, all of which Betty exhibited starting just weeks after this happened. My point here isn't that these things are unequivocally alien, but that the people who would first receive alien communications, or who would be able to confirm those communications and be trusted by the public, seem very much remiss in doing their due diligence when it comes to the actually strange. It seems bizarre to me that almost every single story I looked up for this video has been debunked or dismissed, yet when I dig into it, the debunk is sometimes sarcastic, often petulant, and missing the actual points in favor of cheap shots. And disturbingly frequently, it's absent of any legitimate thought or reason. It seems that the stewards of this information are willing to lie and obfuscate to avoid actually doing what they would have us believe they're doing, and that puts them in a position not of stewardship of that information, but gatekeeping the information. In that situation, it falls to us to find a workaround. Maybe when we do that, we find that we are alone. That's fine. But I don't think we will. I think we'll find that there are a lot of situations just like the ones I mentioned, and they were kept from us by people who very much know what they're doing. There's a fair amount of evidence between this episode and the last which suggests to me that these beings want to be noticed, or at the very least, they don't want to be completely unnoticed. Yet they don't just land on the White House lawn and wait for CNN to show up. That would solve all of the problems of miscommunications, eliminate the obstacle of the gatekeepers, and give us unequivocal proof, so why not? Well, if they call, we hang up. If they write a note, we say that it was kids playing out in a field. If they fly in our airspace, we try to chase them or shoot them down. If they crash, we dissect them. Every attempt at communication is subverted by the gatekeepers. And the real question to me is, why are we doing that? It doesn't make any sense from any way that I think about it. If we allied with them, we'd benefit technologically and scientifically now, rather than after we chased them down, finally downed one, shipped it all over the country, studied it, figured it out, built a working model, and figured out how to integrate it with our own existing technology or replaced our existing technology with alien technology. We'd lose less people and free up others to work on further advancement that could be shared between our civilizations. Sure, we wouldn't have the edge of technological superiority that we had over our Earth-based enemies, but that should be incentivizing every country to individually ally with extraterrestrials so that they would get that edge. So why does it feel more like we're ignoring them and shaming the public into thinking that they're not real? Leaked CIA memorandums and documents show that the intelligence community is very concerned with making large announcements that may be seen as being incongruous with the beliefs of the general population. But surely the benefits of an alliance with an extraterrestrial intelligence is more important than the damaged dogma of the excessively religious or the fragility of the mentally unstable. Dropping the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were incongruous with the beliefs of a lot of people, but we needed to end the war. Cloning was incongruous with the beliefs of a lot of people, but scientific innovation was important to us. Government agencies spying on the American people are incongruous with the beliefs of a lot of people, yet the government says that Homeland Security is important and continues to do it. And I'm not making moral statements about any of those actions. I'm saying that the concern about releasing information that may be damaging to the dogma of the public at large dries up very quickly in the face of necessary progress. So if it's not drying up, that says to me that we're missing a major piece of this puzzle.
So why all the secrecy? Why the cover-up and the lies? What is it about this topic that terrifies the established order into going to such lengths to hide, deny, and lie their way out of telling the truth about what's really going on? In the previous episode, we covered just how upsetting some of the technological revelations would be to the established world order. Yet there might be something deeper going on here. While many believe that UFOs and UAP are just secret advanced projects of human origin, we can now start to see that there are aspects of this phenomenon that suggest otherwise. So if not all of this phenomenon is of human origin, then how do we account for the rest? In order to dig deeper into what may be going on here, we must turn to the witnesses themselves. For what is in our skies has also been seen to land, and when they land, sometimes their occupants come out. Some cower in fear from their apparent abductors, traumatized as they recall paralysis and painful medical treatments. Others forge bonds with these strange visitors, seeking communion and unlocking a deeper meaning that borders on the spiritual. And other encounters still are simply momentary glimpses into strange worlds unknown, the witnesses left alone to forever wonder just what mysteries the universe holds. Join us for our next episode.
Paranormalcy is produced and co-written by Matthew Miglorisi and Sarah O'Shea. We produce our own music and our own art. To support our work, please visit our website in the link below where you can contribute to our crowdfunding, purchase the Paranormalcy book, and enjoy our art and music. We encourage you to reach out to us and share your own paranormal experiences. Our email address can be found on our website and in the link below. We would love to hear from you. Thanks for listening.